I think this may be EFCA's cultural moment if we step back for a minute and you really look at the big picture, because in an era where everybody wants to be polarized and they get a lot of clicks and likes and attention by being really strong on one side or the other, the EFCA, which has always been that gospel-centered movement, now has the opportunity to step into a space that can define the issue with such clarity in a way that does not lead people to one or the other and doesn't exclude anyone except those that are fundamentally opposed to the centrality of the gospel.
Well, in recent months, both the Board of Directors and the Board of Ministerial Standing approved a document, what we call a declaration, and it was shared at the General Conference of the EFCA, where we stand in the EFCA, denials and affirmations. Well, in this conversation, I am thrilled to have with us two EFCA district superintendents to hear about challenges facing local churches and districts and churches within the district, and to get their perspective on this declaration where we stand in the EFCA. We have with us today Tim Jacobs and Sam Huggard. And would you please introduce yourselves and describe or explain just a little bit about your ministry and how you came into this role?
Hey, Greg and Tim, great to be with you. I've served now as district superintendent in New England. This is my 7th year. And prior to that, I served as a local church pastor and church planter in New England. My whole ministry has been in New England. And so I feel I really know this area well. My primary role as superintendent is to serve local church pastors and local church leadership teams. And so trying to be a pastor to pastors, be a resource for churches during times of difficulty, question, conflict, pastoral transition, and to catalyze church multiplication. So I really enjoy this role, grateful that God has called me here, and grateful to be part of the EFCA.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And now, since we did this alphabetically, Tim.
Yeah, Tim Jacobs, and with EFCA West, almost 4 years in to my role here, was a church planter for a number of years, and then did a turnaround church in the area I live in the Phoenix metro area in Arizona, and that's where we still live. I absolutely love what I get to do to be a district superintendent. We have, our district is parts of 7 states in the West: California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, part of Idaho, part of Nevada, part of Texas. And kind of like Sam said, I mean, we're here to strengthen our church leaders. We're here to help churches start and plant new churches, and certainly revitalize churches. And then we're also here to help our churches just reach all the people around them. As we see all over the nation, there's changing demographics, and we have a lot of opportunity to help our churches retool and readjust to face the challenges that are in front of them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you both. In some ways, you are putting flesh on what is stated in our bylaws, our EFCA bylaws. Now, we don't often get into bylaw matters, but they do important. And here's how they are important. Here's how it's described. A district represents the EFCA to its member churches. It exists primarily to serve local churches and enhance their ministries, just as the EFCA exists primarily to serve local churches and districts and enhance their ministries. And let me just say this, that it is a wonderful joy and privilege for me to serve with you two and all the other DS district superintendents as well, as we seek to serve pastors, leaders, local churches in our districts. So you put flesh on the bones of what is articulated in our bylaws. So thank you for that. I wonder, just understanding some district ministry and the context of district ministry. You, Sam, have been in the role a little bit longer, but you've been fully engaged, both of you, in pastoral ministry in the context of the local church and involved in the EFCA. What are some of the ways in which you've seen the ministry landscape? Just think of the last decade. What are some ways, just one or two or three significant ways you have perceived the ministry landscape changing? And, both of you are located, one West Coast, one East Coast. But just if you would, Tim, if you would begin, what are some things that you've observed ministry landscape shifts or changes or trends or fads?
Well, I think anyone would agree that what we're seeing now is there's a great intensity in terms of how pastors are perceived. There's a scrutinizing of everything that they say. There is very much, we have a word right now, triggered. People get triggered by certain things. And so I remember a decade ago, I could get up, for example, and preach a sermon on same-sex marriage and our convictions about it. And it would be understood that, while we want to be loving and kind and everything else, this is kind of what we believe and what we teach. And so there's a way to do that. Now there's a much greater hesitancy on the part of the average pastor to publicly speak on that, not just because of how it might be received in their auditorium or in their worship center, but if it goes online and how it can be soundbited and reproduced and then characterized and mischaracterized and make its way all throughout the nation. So I think that the fear that a lot of our leaders have, which is a legitimate fear of being misquoted, taken out of context, or just have anything said that someone disagrees with and then turns into a character thing, has shaped a lot of the ways that churches feel that they need to communicate and address the culture at this moment.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Sam, hang on just a moment. I'm just going to add to this, Tim. And it seems to me that there's a temptation then to say nothing. I mean, on the one hand, you get those that are going to say too much and conclude they have to say something about everything. And on the other hand, those that want to be biblically faithful and yet also wise, discerning, there's a temptation to then end up saying nothing. But we must conclude that when we say nothing, we're going to avoid sort of the mischaracterization or a misuse of what we say. But we must conclude that the gaps of silence will not remain gaps; they will be filled. And I think that's some of what I think we're wrestling with as well, Tim, based upon what you said.
Absolutely. So I think on the one hand, there's a concern about not saying, I don't want to say anything, but then there's the other side that uses the technology that we have now, the ability to put things out there and post something on social media to be incendiary and to gain the followers and the likes and that sort of thing. So it's a very volatile time that I don't think that we could have predicted a decade ago.
Yeah, I think so. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything Tim said. I'll take it from a little different lens. I would say 10 years ago, already we were kind of in the midst of living in, I would call a post kind of Christian culture. Clearly, it's not the same as it is today. And so I'd say 10 years ago, I think we largely were thinking if we can, structure our churches well, be faithful to the gospel. In large part, we'll see people that do want to come through our doors and hear. And so there really was much more of an emphasis on doing things well to bring people in. And right now, I'm finding that to be not as much the case, at least in New England, which is a very post-Christian area. There really isn't that assumption that if we are doing ministry well, we're going to be attracting people from the community. And there really is this sense of needing to find ways in which we are out in the community, bringing the gospel to the community around us. Now, also the change in the kind of the post-Christian mindset also, I think, has at times infiltrated the church as well. Even people who are certainly believers don't realize the degree to which they are shaped by the values of a post-Christian society.
Yeah, we're not exempt, are we?
No, not at all. And so I think in the past, we could assume some things about those in the church that we just can't assume today.
Yeah, I think that's right. I will often say that we're living in a day in which I refer to as postmodern and increasingly post-Christian. I don't think we're quite there yet, but there are vestiges that remain. But there are some that would say that 30 years, 40 years ago, agree or disagree that the culture was more affirming of Christianity or the Christian faith, that maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago it was more neutral, and today it's antagonistic, and there may be something to that, and yet on the other hand, we need to realize. I mean, you go back to the early centuries, right? And the Christian faith, it's always going to offend, inevitably in some way. But as those that affirm the gospel of Jesus Christ, the gospel is against us in the sense of it's against our sin and our fallenness for us. That is to say, you need to deal with the sin before you can address the salvation aspect. And it seems to me that it's very unique. Is there anything unique? Let's just say, so Tim, you're in the West. Is there anything unique in your part of the country that presents certain pressure points for the ministry in local churches? And Sam, I'd like for you to follow you did mention something already, in the New England district, but just wondering if there's anything further on that.
Well, Greg, what's so fascinating about, for example, our districts, if you just look at California, if you look at politics, there is a massive difference between obviously the Bay Area and if you just go inland a little bit into the Central Valley. It's a different world. Politically, it's a different world in terms of how people think. And then you move out into other states, like, for example, where I live here in Arizona, people leave these places, they leave the coast to come and they leave because they feel like the landscape around them has shifted. Yeah. That they no longer feel like this is home to them or whatever. And the part of the problem, as you said, is helping our churches, helping our pastors and leaders help their congregations discern the difference between the gospel message and the call of being a follower of Jesus and the whole political issue. So you have issues on both sides. And what's so fun actually for me to be a district superintendent in the region that we have is that I have to kind of be somewhat of a, it's like when in Rome, kind of a thing. So I'll go to the Bay Area and I'll have certain conversations with pastoral leaders and they'll share their thoughts about things. And inevitably politics and social issues gets mixed into that. Not that it's anti-biblical or anything like that on one way or the other. It's just their view. And then you move into other parts and you hear how people talk about the people that, live in the city that I just came from. Yeah. And so even within our evangelical world, there's a diversity of thought on I would say non-essential issues when it comes to politics and that kind of thing. And so to your point, we have to keep the gospel central. Amen. Because that is the only thing that's going to keep uniting us. And then we can freely, have diversity of thought on how we solve some of the other societal problems. But it's great. It's a huge, there's much diversity within even our district.
Yeah. I think of Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, when he's with a Jew, it just what you described, it reminded me of that. And yet the reason he can flex one way or another is because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But he will not equivocate on the gospel of Jesus Christ. He will not equivocate. That is because it is of first importance. And I just, that's what you're saying. That's what needs to unite us. My thought was, the past few years have both created issues in and for the church, which we know well. You just have rehearsed some. Sam, I'll get to you in just a moment. But it also has, I think, manifested and revealed issues in the lives of Christians in the church. And I wonder, it's a question that I've asked myself multiple times over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. We thought that our unity was in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the question has simply been raised: was it? Is it? And sometimes I think it's been the gospel plus. And there have been divisions and a sifting and a sorting with the plus and not the gospel of Jesus Christ fundamentally and foundationally. But that's just an observation that I've had to build on what you said, Tim. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's been helpful hearing both of you talk. I do think that over the past few years, some of that has been revealed, Greg, about the gospel plus other pieces that really our unity is built around. And I think as a result, it's made us suspicious. Yeah. I do sense a real heightened suspicion from people. Are you really, with me? And so I just sense that some of our togetherness is a little more fragile. Yeah. So sort of during some of these larger cultural events that have come along the past couple of years, there's been some a quickness to pull back or a quickness to attack. And so I find a heightened suspicion, which probably makes some of these different conversations a little more challenging. And I don't think that's different in New England. I think probably what's more unique to New England, I mentioned earlier that New England is a very post-Christian area of the country. In our fairly recent Barna study, 8 of the 10 most post-Christian cities in America are in New England.
Wow, yeah.
And on top of that, it's also a very independent, self-reliant kind of area of the country. Some of that is the heightened focus on education. But I just find that there's a real sense of self-reliance and independence.
Autonomy.
Yes, autonomy. Exactly. And so even just kind of the natural draw towards like communal structures, it isn't as naturally there.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge when you're trying to draw people into a community of faith. And basically the phrase is all set. I'm all set.
Yeah.
And there's just a sense of being self-reliant. That's a real barrier.
That's very helpful. Go ahead, Tim. You were going to add?
Well, no, Sam, I think that was brilliant about suspicion. I think that's absolutely right. It's like when you talk to someone, you meet someone, it's almost like you have to give them your resume or pedigree. So before we can even have a conversation, and this is kind of similar to when people posting signs out in their yard, here's my creed. In this house, we believe all of these things. And so, okay, good, you pass. We can talk. We can be friends. But if we differ on any one of these things, now you're suspect.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I refer to that as yard sign theology rather than biblical theology. As we transition, so navigating as an EFCA church family, to transition from what we've been talking about in sort of some of the unique ways in which we express ministry is lived out today. One has said recently, I heard him say, people want what they hear on Sunday for 1 hour to align with what they hear on cable news for 30 hours. And that I think describes some of what it captures or encapsulates some of what we were talking about. Yeah, let's think now about navigating some cultural challenges. In our last discussion, our last episode on our podcast, we discussed how the EFCA came to this moment in our ministry history of where we stand in the EFCA, a declaration, denials and affirmations. I would be interested to hear from your perspective. It was, approved by the two boards, Board of Ministerial Standing and Board of Directors, and then it was shared with the district superintendents that just heartily affirmed the document. It just spontaneously. It wasn't even asked, but it was just something that resonated so deeply. And so, would you give us just a bit of a perspective on the document from NEDA, New England District, and EFCA West? Let's this time start with Sam.
I would say this document did strike a chord with me early on, Greg.
That's right. You serve on the board of directors too. So you yeah, okay. That's right. Yep.
So when I first heard it, what I immediately sensed was this helps put some language both to a current season that we are in that needs to have articulation, but also to some of our ethos that is more subtle.
Yeah.
So clearly what's at the center of the Evangelical Free Church is our statement of faith.
Yeah.
It's who we are. Yet we also know there's a real sense of who we are in terms of the significance of silence and kind of how we stand on the major things, but there's charity on the minor things. But therein lies a lot of the rub. What is major? What is minor? And how do we navigate those challenges? And so this document begins to speak to some of the cultural issues that are causing some real tension and even division within the church right now. And churches are really asking the question, where does the EFCA stand on these kind of things? Because it's not in our statement of faith explicitly. So who are we? Where are we headed together? And what I so appreciated is that this document spoke to some of these matters without coming across of thou shalt believe X, Y, and Z. It did it in a very EFCA way. And so I thought it really represented our identity, our ethos. And so I got very excited when I first heard it. This is the kind of thing that needs to be said in this moment. Of course, no document is perfect. I'm sure there'll be things we continue to work on. But man, this is lends itself to a much better conversation when you have a really good place to start from. So I really thought it spoke to our identity, our ethos, and some of those areas where the doctrinal statement doesn't directly speak to.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Tim, what about you?
Well, exactly what Sam was saying about the need to say something, I think was apparent. As we have 200 congregations in our district, and many of the pastors I was interacting with, they were asking, where does the FCA stand on this? What do you think about this? And what I learned, what was amazing to me about this, when I read it, just like Sam, as soon as I read it, I said, yeah, this is us. In fact, I think this may be EFCA's cultural moment, if we step back for a minute, because, and you really look at the big picture, because in an era where everybody wants to be polarized, and they get a lot of clicks and likes and attention by being really strong on one side or the other, the EFCA, which has always been that gospel-centered movement, now has the opportunity to step into a space that can define the issue with such clarity in a way that does not lead people to one or the other, and doesn't exclude anyone except those that are fundamentally opposed to the centrality of the gospel. If you don't believe that the gospel is the core message that we're about, then you probably don't belong with us. But what I think was so great about this document is that silent majority in our churches, the run-of-the-mill people that show up, they don't want to fight. Yeah, they may watch cable news and they have opinions, but they don't want to fight about this stuff. They look around the world and they go, what's going on? They found themselves in this document. They found their voice in what was written here, because they said, yeah, you know what? I'm not woke. No, I'm not woke, but there's some racial stuff going on. And no, I don't believe in the transgender stuff, but you know what? There's people that struggle. And that's what the document articulated in the context of the gospel, the truth and the hope of the gospel. So absolutely, I think it had a greater unifying effect in our district and in our churches than anything that I've seen since I've been in the EFCA.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. I have, the way I described it is, let's not make it more than it is. That is to say, this is a moment in God's redemptive history, moving towards an end, but let's not make less of it either. This is an important historical moment. And it may have a short shelf life because of this, the 8 bulleted items. But the manner in which we address things, for example, the introduction to the piece and the summary statement, the way we live this out foundationally in the gospel of Jesus Christ and affirming the authority of the scriptures and that Jesus Christ is Lord of our lives and head of the church, that never changes. So whatever the issue is next year, that still is fundamental for how we understand these issues, whatever they might be, and how we live it out. And I think in many ways, we affirm the gospel, we love the Lord Jesus Christ, and we're not angry. We affirm it with convictional kindness. Yes, Tim.
Well, right. And the reason I mentioned the cultural moment was because it seemed like for so long, there was this, we believe in the significance of silence, and it has been the strength of the EFCA, and I think it's a wonderful thing. But again, so there was so much, there has been and continues to be a lot of angst about these issues. But what I'm trying to say is that the EFCA's approach to these issues, I think, has hit the target in a way that other groups' approaches, the way they've approached issues in the past, couldn't do. Because groups that have found themselves on and gotten their success from being incendiary or exclusionary or really narrow or rigid, then have to go one way or the other. But for us to be able to say, no, listen, we've been about the gospel, and some of these things we just kind of hold loosely, I think has captured an element, a segment of people that were waiting for the EFCA to say something. Yeah. So, for example, at EFCA 1, when the document was read, I had multiple pastors coming up to me who were kind of on the fringes of our movement, who were like, maybe I'm a newer pastor. Are we really going to get excited about this movement or not? Who were coming up to me saying, if this is what EFCA is about, I want in. And that's what I mean by saying, I think we hit something, and it may have been a moment that we captured, that you guys captured by writing this.
Yeah, I would concur. In fact, I was going to ask about sort of the conclusion after President Complin read it at the conclusion of his report, the response. But before doing that, Sam, you share as well additional thoughts.
Yeah, I am grateful, for the tone that it struck, and also how it's instructive. and I'm just being instructed by the content of saying who we are, by the introduction, by the conclusion, by saying, here's how we articulate things like this. And so I find that in some ways, we're helping to disciple people,
right.
and to how you handle these kind of matters. The other piece that I really appreciate is that the temptation right now, you mentioned earlier the temptation to say nothing or to say too much. And the temptation right now is for a lot of people, especially leaders, to say too much, where there are areas where they aren't clear, or maybe where the scriptures are not explicit. And what I felt is that this was it was a humble document. It was modest in that it didn't overreach. And so that's why I think some people would be upset. They wanted to say more.
Right.
And this is where you talked earlier about the sifting and the sorting that's taking place. I do not want to be part of making people opt out.
Yeah.
That said, we need to provide ways in which people can sift and sort.
Yeah.
This document helps people without overriding their conscience, but consider the ethos of the EFCA. So the spirit of this is so important. And in the spirit of our age, when everyone is jumping on the bully pulpit and really saying very extreme statements, to be able to articulate truth, but from a humble posture, it's so key. And so I appreciated the tone of the document. And I think that maybe even more than the direct content is what's going to be so helpful in the long run.
Yeah. The term that we've used often is convictional kindness. That is conviction, the faith once for all entrusted to the saints, and without equivocation, without reservation, here we stand, right? But also kindness, the manner in which, the spirit with which we affirm the convictions that we hold as a fruit of the Spirit, and that it seems to me captures what you're saying, that it's not just the truth of what we're saying, but it's the manner in which we're saying it, and that seems to capture it. As we draw to a close here, I'd like for us to think for a moment about, since our shared ministry in the gospel of Jesus Christ is to serve pastors, ministers, and churches, tell us, and Tim, I'll begin with you, tell us how this document has been helpful. We're kind of bringing it full circle. I mean, we've talked about it throughout here, but just to summarize, how this document, where we stand in the EFCA, denials and affirmations, how it's been helpful or used in the district and in churches. If you could share maybe an example or two of how it's going to be used, and then Sam, if you would follow, please.
Well, I know of several churches that have told me that they have stood up in their congregation on a Sunday morning and read this statement to them to say, hey, we've received this from our denomination and we believe it and we want to share it with you. The other way that's been really helpful, for example, there was a church. We have several churches. We have 4 churches right now in EFCA West in our region that want to join us. And I have used this as a recruiting tool for churches that are interested. So what we're finding is that independent churches that may have been started 15 or 20 years ago and starting to think, hey, what longevity-wise, we probably need to make some decisions about who we connect with and everything else. And when I mentioned to them that we have a document like this, they immediately said, can you send that to me? We need that. Yeah. Because they don't have it. And they're looking for the language. And so if they're going to identify with us, chances are they're not only going to find alignment with this, but they're going to find energy from it because it's going to give them the language that they need to effectively disciple their congregations.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Sam, what about you? The way district or churches, how is it being used?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'll share in general and then one specific story.
Please.
In general, it's been a very good document for discussion with pastors. Yeah. In some of our pastor regional gatherings, we've discussed it. The response has been widely beneficial. We're actually going to have a district-wide Zoom roundtable that you're going to join us for.
I look forward to it, brother.
This. Yeah, we do as well. But in specific, I had one church in particular who actually I talked with over the past year, who they had some real concerns on cultural matters, wondering where the EFCA was going. And see, that's why this was so needed, because it's not just people sitting around wondering. Things are coming at them. Yeah. So this chairman of the elder board had been contacted with concerns about the EFCA. And so he's kind of just scrambling to find out, what's happening here? When I was able to share this with him, I mean, it gave him such confidence. And where the EFCA is at. I went to their website this past week, and that document is linked on their website right now.
Yeah.
And it's something that's tangible that people can really point to, rather than just say, I talked to a guy, he assured me they're okay. And so it just gave us such confidence with how well it was done, how well it's articulated, and then just having that kind of tangible finished product. So I've been very grateful to be able to have a document to share when churches have questions like that.
Yeah. That's extremely helpful, and I'm encouraged that it's being used in that way. In a previous episode, we talked about one district actually is using it with search teams for local churches, so that when one is looking for a pastor, it's not just fundamentally it's our statement of faith, it's doctrine, but it's also then how that is lived out. It's a ministry context, isn't it? And that, go ahead, Sam.
I would agree wholeheartedly, because right now there's a lot of people that can affirm our statement of faith. That our statement of faith is wonderful, and one of the strength is our the breadth of it for our movement. But because a lot of people can fit under our statement of faith who really aren't part of the EFCA ethos, it's helpful having this kind of document to help clarify for pastors that we want in our free church that this is the ethos that we are talking about. So this, paired with our statement of faith, I think just provides a really robust target of who we are as a free church.
Yeah, I think so. In fact, in some ways, even in the document, the final concluding paragraph in the document, we say that we're neither progressive evangelical, nor are we neo-fundamentalist, and those have definitions and meanings, but we're acknowledging that we're neither of those. We are evangelicals, and we are joy-filled evangelicals with convictional kindness. Well, thank you both. Just a last summarizing, sort of concluding question. As you think about this, what is your hope and prayer for how this can be used in your district, but even more broadly in the EFCA?
Well, I believe that as I said before, it's a discipling document, because I think it helps people understand that the gospel is central, and so the gospel. Our belief in the gospel is what needs to govern how we view these issues, not the other way around.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's where we've gotten off track, is we've let CNN and Fox News and Twitter and these kinds of things then inform how we're to see the gospel. And so that's where we've gotten off track. So I think it's a discipling document. I also think it's going to be a peacemaking document as well, as I hope it can be, because I hope what it can do is take well-meaning people in congregations who have strong convictions and are legitimately worried about the things that they're seeing going on in society, and make them look across the quote unquote aisle, at the other person in the congregation sitting on the other side going, you know what? I see what you're concerned about, but if we can put the gospel in the middle and you can see what I'm concerned about, maybe we can come together. And actually, that's where the church can be stronger. For example, I've had conversations with several people in the church that I still attend, that I pastored for 12 years, who differ with me on some social issues, but we've always been able to look each other in the eye and say, but you know what? These things are secondary to the fact that we both share the gospel, and that actually strengthens our churches rather than weakens them. And that's why I think it's so important for the EFCA to do something like this, because neutrality in this case does not mean weakness or passivity. Right. And it's not even, and that's the thing, neutrality can be interpreted that way, but we talk about, here's what I'm trying to say. Neutrality is how we were potentially perceived by some people. But this is not a neutral document. That's the point. This is not neutral. This is an assertion of the gospel, an assertion of the primacy of the gospel. And that's where, when both sides are saying, well, you're not really on board unless you believe X, Y, or Z. It's like, no, you can't define the issue. We are going to define, we as EFCA, we're going to define the issue. And we're going to define it in terms of the gospel. Yeah. So, yeah.
It seems to me that we affirm the gospel, but then as the people of God, the Church of Jesus Christ, we also are a living reflection of the gospel. And that's where I think the challenge the last few years has been, are we? Sam?
Yeah, I really hope that in the days, months, years ahead, we can use this document to really grow in the conversation that the affirmations speak to. I think the denials helps give us the boundaries in which to have the conversation, and so it gives us confidence. My guess is a lot of people saw the denials and were like, "Whew, good," and it kind of gave them confidence. We need to lean into the affirmations. And so it's okay. How do we really now work and be the people that God has made us to be? And so I think this document helps us have good talking points to work from. It gives us kind of the parameters in which to operate. But also, it's not an end in and of itself. I like that it's guiding us somewhere.
Right.
Like, how do we live out these, not just, the denial say who we're not, but how do we live out these affirmations, who we are? And so I really appreciate it. I think it's kind of guiding us somewhere and how to really effectively live out God's call on us in this culture today.
Yeah, I think so too. I've described it in this way, that if this is our statement of faith and this is our ministry expression over here, this document has become a theological vision that guides us in how we will live out our what we affirm of biblical truth. And I have found, looking at it that way, this is a theological vision. It's not all there is to say, but at this moment, as you mentioned earlier, Tim, at this moment, it's very important that this is what we said as we engage in ministry over here. And so it puts those two pieces together, and I find it to be a great strength. Well, let me do this. Any last comments? I'll give you both the last word before I pray. But any last comments, thoughts that you might have that you have not yet been able to articulate?
Well, I'd only say that when people talk about, sometimes people will wonder, and we're often explaining to our congregations and our pastors, the value. Mm-hmm. What is the value of a denomination? Mm-hmm. And we can bring people together. Well, networks can do that, or we can train people. Well, church planting organizations can do that, or mm-hmm. leadership organizations can do that, and that's fine. But I think one of the things that this document did do was reinforce once again the value that a denomination can bring, because in this case this document gives a voice, and you all at the national office presented something, as you stated, that is able to define for our congregations exactly what the statement can be there on the ground level. And I just don't know, there's not a whole lot of other organizations can do that in the context of relationship, in the context of that family that we have, and in such a way that again creates energy. So again, like you said, Greg, it's not the end all be all, of course, but it was what was needed at the time and what is needed at the time. And even we look forward, it's going to be interesting to see as we see now the landscape even shifting again with some of the issues we're seeing going on in the world, and how the world's going to respond with what kind of polarity are they going to respond with, and what is that going to require of not just the EFCA, but our individual churches in general. How can we keep equipping and equipping our churches to be able to address these issues with a gospel centrality? And that's what I think is important about this.
It really is a disciple-making resource. It's brief, but it's a disciple-making resource. It really is for this moment. Sam?
You love to talk about a convictional kindness, Greg, and I love that phrase. And I think this document really embodies that idea. And I'll add another word into there. It's the word clarity.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that's so needed in our day. There's a lot of vague hypothetical arguments. I find people very much at odds with one another over arguments that I can't even quite clarify myself. And so having a clear document that has a humble posture, is based in convictions. I really hope that we can increasingly become a movement of churches that are characterized by this kind of communication that is clear, that is convictional, and is kind. Wouldn't it be great if this was not just one document like that, but all of our communication was characterized this way?
Yeah, amen to that. Well, thank you both very much. It's been very helpful, very instructive to have this conversation. I'm encouraged to hear how the Lord is using you in your districts in ministry, in our partnership in the ministry of the gospel, and encouraged as well to hear how this document that the Lord, we believe, guided us at this moment, this important moment to draft, and the affirmation that it's received. It's been very encouraging, and we will pray for the sake of Christ that it would be used to bear fruit. And you know, if it's just a document, but it's to shine the light on the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that's our hope and our prayer.